I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with two-time Emmy winner Claire Foy, who stars as Margaret Campbell on A Very British Scandal. And Claire, I was reading a piece about Margaret, and they referred to her kind of condescendingly as the hot mess duchess. And I'm wondering if you had a preconceived notion of her prior to playing her, and did that notion change as you played her?
I think a hot mess is probably better. She gets called the dirty duchess in England. I don't know which is better. No, I didn't know anything about her really, or anything at all. I didn't know anything about her. And so I think my first getting to know her was through Sarah Phelps's script, which I think was the best way, because Sarah writes a very good script to read. Everything seamlessly flows from one thing to the next. It's like reading a novel almost. And so as soon as I read it, I was really intrigued by her. And then I bought a couple of books that have been written about her. And then I read her book, I think before I even agreed to do it. And then my opinion sort of formed. So I think I was pretty lucky because I had no preconception about her. I think if I had been a different generation, or if I'd had information handed down to me, I probably would have had all these sort of judgments of her. But I was able to read it with kind of a fresh eyes on her, really. So no, I didn't, and I think that was probably the biggest gift of doing it. Really, was that I didn't think I knew her before I played her.
Well, it's funny because after watching the show, because like you, I had no idea who this person was, and it was only after watching the series that I actually watched some videos of her, some actual real life, and listened to some of what she said. And this woman is so much more complicated than how I think the press treated her in those days. It's kind of like one of the original character assassinations played out for public fodder.
And there's been so many. Every day, a million times a day, there's some sort of character assassination. Yeah, I mean, honest with you, that's one of my biggest takeaways. Show, but also, from weirdly my experience, is that you aren't really in control of the narrative. If articles are going to be written about you or things like that, you aren't in charge of the narrative of who you are. And I think Margaret's biggest downfall, or one of the many of them, was that she thought she was, and she thought she held the press in the palm of her hand. And she did, and many people did in that way. And she thought it was a very complicit, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And she thought she could control what was out there. And I think it was that sort of very rude awakening that she couldn't. And the story was bigger than her. And also there was more in it for the press to paint her as this dirty duchess, as this terrible wife, terrible mother, sort of nymphomaniac, than it was to investigate this woman and find the truth of who she was and her character. That doesn't sell papers. So they went with that, and they ran with it, and they realized that sold lots of papers, and people really loved that kind of that story of who she was. And yeah, she was much more complicated to that. There is always some sort of element of truth, and in the stories written about her. But yeah, I mean, I saw a like a scrapbook of all the articles put together, and it's pretty horrendous, and also pretty horrendous because Ian was behaving in such a diabolical way, and yet to the press as well. The pictures, there were pictures of him faux kissing women behind hats outside of the courtroom, and it's so disrespectful what he's doing. But everyone's going, "Oh, good on you, mate. Yeah, you got rid of her." And you're like, okay, she's pretty fabulous, guys. So leave her alone.
Is there the same double standard, do you think, still today? I mean, we're talking 1963 here. And
between the way that men are portrayed and the way women are portrayed.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if Margaret would be, for lack of a better term, slut shamed in modern press as she was in the 1960s?
Oh, I mean, the way that press, media works now is, I can't keep up with it, to be honest with you. I, you know, yeah, I can't keep up with journalism, and because I think it's changing so rapidly because of social media and things like that. So I don't really know, to be perfectly honest with you. But I do think that it, there were moments when I was shooting it when I was the parallels between how women are treated and now and how they were treated then, not just in the press, but the standards are 1,000 times higher for the way that women are supposed to behave as to men. And that's what's interesting about Margaret and Ian's marriage, is the fact that she wasn't doing anything that he wasn't doing. He was very, very, it was common knowledge that he was having many affairs. She was doing the same, and they sort of not had a deal, but that was what a lot of the upper classes did. It wasn't uncommon. But because she was a woman and she was doing it, that's worse, obviously. Why that's worse, no one can quite put their finger on. But there's sort of this idea of femininity and what it is to be a woman, and I think unfortunately that is still, I think it takes many, many generations for that to be sort of rectified. So I think that's very prevalent today. I think you see it all the time, all day, every day, unfortunately.
Did you see I saw a certain vulnerability in her that I thought some of the most interesting scenes were the scenes between her and her father. She almost changes her body language, almost changes around her father. Desperate for his approval almost.
Oh yeah, she's Daddy's little girl. She had a very complicated relationship with her mother, and through that with women in general. She didn't feel like being with women was very safe, and I'm the opposite, so that was a real stretch for me. But she didn't trust women, she didn't like women, she thought women were boring, which these are all her own words. She just hadn't got a lot of time for them. And her father, I think it was interesting what ended up being shown in the show was that he was quite sort of dismissive of her with his second marriage and things like that. And I think that is true, but he was completely devoted to her. Completely devoted. She was an only child, and she was the apple of her father's eye, and she got everything that she wanted. And I found that for me, it was a really easy way of sort of getting to know her, was her love of her father, because she worshipped him. He was the person who she would ask for advice. He was the person that she would instantly go to about anything, and she would curate her image of what she was like for him. And yeah, and I really felt very, I'm not a daddy's girl, and it was quite interesting to try that on and try on the sort of the putting on of being the child, being the naive, daddy save me. And I don't think she wanted, there was an element of her that she wanted men to save her, but she needed things from men. She needed attention, and she needed to be desired, and that gave her it was like not kryptonite. What's the opposite? The kryptonite's the one that kills Superman, isn't it?
It's like the sun.
But the one that it's like the sun. She was a sapling.
Yeah.
And the men were the sun. It was where she got what she needed, basically, and that's why it's such a betrayal of Ian to use. It made up so much of her soul and her heart was those relationships with men, and not just in a sexual way, but in a kind of it defined who she was as a human being.
And yet, it's funny because I feel like the show makes you sympathize with her, but it also doesn't excuse some of the other, shall we say, less lovely choices that she makes. Forgery and, calling into question children's paternity. Was it really important that she be, a multifaceted person, not just either, a villain or a victim?
Yeah, I don't think the show could have been made if you tried to make her a really upstanding citizen. That's not the truth of who she was. And I think it would have been really difficult to do that as well, because you basically rewriting history. She was a really complicated person. Everybody is. Everyone does bad things, in someone's view. You know, you can't live your life doing all the right things, making all the right choices all the time. It's completely impossible. And that's not to say that she didn't cause harm and that she didn't, you know, wreak havoc, basically, because she did. But, and it's not to excuse her behavior, but at the same time, you know, she's interesting. Like, she's an interesting person. And if we just showed good people all the time on screen, we wouldn't really learn a lot about humanity. And I think there is so much to be learned from her. She was so childlike and ignorant, in the sense that she just didn't think. You know, she was a terrible forger, terrible liar, terrible like hatcher of plans. You know, she had absolutely no skill in it whatsoever, but she did it completely naively, and there was some sort of weird sort of guilelessness to her, like in the sense that you sort of couldn't believe she'd done it because it was so stupid. You'd be like, no one would ever think that that would work. But then there was also something so lovely in her willingness to love as well. You know, she was so willing to love Ian. And I really believe that she did love him. And you know, I think I always felt like she was quite a difficult person to hate, because you were hating someone who wasn't really a grown-up, you know, and so that's not particularly nice, is it? But yeah, no, I thought that, you know, the more, you know, nuance and to me was the more interesting, like the, you know, and but there was a fear. I remember me and Paul saying, oh God, I mean, they're pretty awful. Maybe no one will make it to the second episode. We'll just be like, they're horrible, turn it off. I'm sure lots of people did.
Well, and talk about, you know, you and Paul Bettany, you two seem to be, I mean, chemistry is one of those, I think, overused words, but it's also something that you can't fake. And a discerning viewer can spot it from a mile away, but the two of you definitely have it. What was that working relationship like?
Oh, it made my day every day. It was a really tough shoot, because Paul basically could do about 6 weeks, I think, or something like that, and then he had to go back to the States. So there was a lot to get done in a very short period of time, and so we really had to hit the ground running. And because of COVID and everything, what you're sort of used to, which you may have in the weeks running up to a job, is all meeting up and having some rehearsal, and you know, and unfortunately, because of COVID, everything was truncated, and it meant that the director had less and less time. And so we really fought for just 2 days of rehearsal, because we just thought it was so important. We just couldn't turn up on set and be married. It would just be so strange. I've never done that before. Would have been awful. But really, luckily, I think we immediately had a camaraderie and immediately knew that we were going to be each other's, like, he was going to be my safe place, basically, because I really respected and admired all his choices, and I really think he's got a really good gauge of kind of cutting through bullshit, basically. And I really appreciated it, and I also really appreciated who he is and as a person, and what he brings to the roles, and his history, and who he is, because I think it just made Ian a much more well-rounded character, and he's so exciting to play opposite, because he's so kind of I don't know, he's really thought about it, and he's really invested in it. And so I mean, that was immediate. If we hadn't have got on, it would have been absolutely horrendous. But I just love him. I find him so funny. And I think it really helped, because we were doing some pretty nasty, mean scenes. And if there had been any sort of bad energy there, it would not have helped. But instead, I just giggled a lot. And I just think that's just the way to work. I just, you know, can't be doing with any sort of bad energy on set. It's just not, it's not worth it.
You know, so there's so many, particularly I think in the third episode, and particularly where Margaret is basically having to hear and react to all of this stuff being said about her, the scenes in the courtroom. You know, we know historically that the actual judgment against her was like this 3-hour screed. And so I'm wondering, are those quiet moments where you're reacting, are those actually more difficult than, say, like the big dramatic scenes?
Oh no, I love them. They're my dream. If I can sit and watch other people act and listen to them, then it's my acts. I don't do it like, I just love it. It's like, who wouldn't love that? I love it. But then I've always loved it. At drama school we did this thing which is like a Stanislavski thing, where basically you bring your entire bedroom into school and you have to just be observed in your bedroom. Sounds a bit weird, but it's amazing. And also, you know, interesting approach to acting. But that was my favorite thing about it, was just being like, and not having to do anything. And then you get the opportunity to feel all the different things that you think, oh, you're like, oh wow, that's interesting as it's happening. So no, they're my, you know, if anything, if it's a big dramatic, you know, you sort of, you know, those scenes which are sort of set up where you know the emotional beats and you know what the audience is supposed to feel. Those, if anything, I find more scary, because I'm like, well, what if I don't feel it? One, two, what if I can't get there? You know, but then, you know, I suppose I find it all interesting, to be honest with you. But no, those are my favorite things to do: sit, listen to other people, and receive news. I love it.
You know, it's funny because on the surface, you know, somebody who, you know, who goes into this series not familiar with Margaret would, you know, initially think, oh, here's Claire Foy doing a upper class British person, and did that give you any kind of pause, or did you work to really differentiate this from The Crown?
No, I mean, it gave me huge pause, to the point of just sort of almost going, do you know what? No thanks. Because I don't know. I mean, it's been a long time since The Crown. For me as an actor, it's like 5 years or something since I last did it. So it doesn't feel to me like I just did it yesterday, and therefore I'm trying on like a nice old suit of being posh again. Because there were, you know, vocally anyway, there were so many, you know, they were so different. But I suppose I couldn't not be aware that I was like, oh, but from the outside, you know, is it just going to be too difficult for people to go, oh, well, there you are being posh again? And it was a real, like, I genuinely was like, I don't know whether I can be bothered with that. But then I had a bit of a word with myself and just sort of said, I can't not do something because I'm worried about what other people think, because that is ludicrous. And I also sort of thought, well, look, it could be a real challenge because of the lack, you know, from the outside, how different can you try and make a woman of that period? You know, you're sort of limited. The cut of the suit can be different, the shoe height can be different, the hair can be slightly different, but it's still a generational woman. And you can't then patronize the audience by saying, oh, I'm going to be a vamp, and I'm going to start behaving like a Hollywood star, you know, because that's not how she behaved. You know, in all the videos of her, or the footage of her, she's very proper, and she wouldn't have looked out of, you know, out of sync with the royal family if she was among them, you know. So I couldn't do that. So I basically took it as a challenge, sort of perverse, sadomasochistic challenge to try and find the minute details that I could. They were obviously incredibly different people and incredibly different characters and with incredibly different behavior. So I hoped that the audience would go along with that. But yeah, I think I'm done now. I don't, you know, it's never really been my wheelhouse. And I've sort of found myself in it. And I think I need to remove myself from it now. I think I need to go on retirement from that bracket for a while, for my own sanity, probably. But you know, I loved playing Margaret. It was so amazing to try her on. Like, I just, you know, I did love it. But yeah.
Well, don't change it on my account.
Oh no, trust me, it's good. It's going to be the right decision for everybody.
Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout Emmy season. Claire Foy, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.